welcome to the last day before spring break, week 12, day 3. Looks like you all did pretty well on the quiz. The midterm's normally 120 minutes. If you start 10 minutes before, you do not get 120 minutes. You get 10 minutes. Okay, so make sure you do not wait to the last minute. I do see when people are submitting things on Canvas, and I can see people have a tendency to do all the stuff like the hour before class starts. So don't do that for the midterm. Okay, get the midterm. I have finished. I published it last night. It'll be live in about an hour, and it may be the easiest midterm I've ever written. So don't take that as an excuse not to study. As long as you've watched all the lectures to date and things like that, you should be fine. We went over the topics yesterday and or on Wednesday, and basically, yeah, I had those notes up and I wrote the questions from that. There is one truth table question that is worth 4 points. Make sure you know how to do truth tables. There's a couple invalid valid sounds. There's a couple types of reasoning questions. There's a lot of fallacies. Not all of them, because there's too many fallacies, right? But a lot of fallacies are on there. All the social issues in computer science, I think, made it onto the midterm, except for the Therac 25. I think the Therac 25 did not make the cut. So, a little guilty. So the reason why I'm telling you this, of course, is so that you don't get, hosed, right? It actually doesn't bother me if you turn in the daily quiz at 9:50. It's fine, but just don't start the midterm at 9:50. You will be hosed by it. Okay. Either people are all good or all bad is false dichotomy, which is based on the black and white thinking, cognitive bias. Okay. No. Yeah, these are just, none of these are remotely close to what this is. And this is basically what the midterm questions are like too. Here's a fallacy, identify it. And none of the questions are similar to each other. I think I have one that has both fallacy of division and fallacy of composition on it. So just make sure you understand the difference between those two. By and large, though, the wrong answers are very wrong. So, like I said, I really tried to make this an easy midterm, and I say that, and then students will probably average a 75% or something and feel horrible about themselves. But that was my mindset going into it, was just try to make all the answers pretty obvious, right? So, ethical systems are on there. I think there's 2 questions on ethical systems. Make sure you know that ethical systems. I think there's 1 or 2 questions on theories of truth. What makes something true? That kind of stuff. Can you put one with the magic word? That's going to be the final. That's going to be on the final. So, and the color I think was French navy. Is that what we figured out the thing was? Unless I'm lying to you. So that'll be on the final. Okay. Yep. So that's the midterm. And let's get going. So anyone recognize where the background is for today? Anyone seen this anime before? So it's an anime called Kimi no Wa, which is very good, Raymar. Your Name, yeah. It's a fantastic anime. Have you seen it before? Yeah, it's very good. So, highly recommend it. If you're a fan of like Miyazaki's films with Studio Ghibli, Kimi no Wa, and then his most recent movie came out a couple years ago and it was called The Weathering of You, or in Japanese it's called Tenki no Ko, The Children of the Weather, I guess, something like that. It's about a girl who can control the weather. It's kind of cool. All right, so let's talk about censorship. That's been coming up a lot recently. So we talked a little bit about Kuhn. I don't think that made it onto the midterm, though. So let's talk about censorship. Because corporate censorship in particular is a really hot topic right now. Elon Musk just bought a 9% stake in Twitter. don't know if you guys heard about that. He's now the largest shareholder of Twitter. And ostensibly the reason why he did that was because he is worried about free speech and censorship on Twitter. So, not sure why he did that. I think because it's just speculation, right? I have no ability to read his mind. What he said in the lead up to it, here, I could just pull it up. Elon Musk, Twitter, public. What he said was, yeah, this is before I bought it, I think. Maybe. I don't know if they have his tweets on here. But basically, he said that Twitter is effectively the public square of today, and their censorship of the public square amounts to the censorship of free speech. And so he made a poll for his followers on Twitter, and 70% of people said that Twitter does not uphold a principled policy on free speech on the platform. And I was somewhat suspicious that he was just going to make his own platform, kind of like what Trump has done with the perhaps somewhat disastrous Truth social network rollout, overseen by our former representative here, Devin Nunes. And but instead of making his own, Elon just bought a large chunk of Twitter and is now on the board of directors for it, and has been talking with the CEO of Twitter, who has a blue check marks. That's good. He's both a passionate believer and intense critic of the service, which is exactly what we need on Twitter. Welcome, Elon. Please don't fire me. So, censorship. So, the actual definition of censorship is when the government does it. Okay? And so, cringe. Are you cringing at the CEO saying, yeah, or both Elon and the CEO? Yeah. That's fair. So, censorship means the government is deleting your speech or suppressing your speech one way or another. And so technically what Twitter does when it, if you post a tweet that says, the COVID vaccine gives you autism or something, and Twitter will maybe delete it, or I don't know what their exact policy is on it. They might just not share it or something. I don't know. On Facebook, they'll put you into Facebook jail, things like that, if you do like anti-vax posts on Facebook and things like that. That's technically not censorship because they're not government. They're not governments, and they're not working on behalf of a government. It's not like the government is telling them delete, these things, right? So in Thailand, they have a less majesty law. Less majesty means you cannot say anything that disparages the majesty of the king. If you're familiar with the history of Europe, you would know exactly what I'm talking about. If you were to make a painting of the king showing him as like a monkey or as a buffoon or something like that, you could very easily be arrested, imprisoned, exiled, executed, depending on the king's mood at the time. It was one of the most interesting positions in Europe was the court jester, because they were sort of given the a liberty to make fun of the king where nobody else could, right? And so there's a famous story of a king who just got really upset at his jester, and because he kept making jokes about the queen, and finally said, all right, I'm going to kill you, but because of all your long service, how do you want to die? I'll give you that. And the jester said, oh, I wish to die of old age. And the king thought that was hilarious and then spared his life. It's kind of a dicey situation to be in. So yeah, in pretty much all European countries today, Western European countries today, I should say, Russia has some issues with this, right? Like, Russia has no free speech, and they are actively engaging in censoring the narrative on the Ukrainian conflict or war, however you want to phrase it. Like, a woman goes on, the background of the Russian TV station with a sign saying everything they're telling you is a lie. She gets arrested. hauled in front of a judge. The judge is like, yo, take it back. She's like, no. So she got sent to Gulag, right? Straight to Gulag. They don't have gulags anymore, but prison, yeah. So yeah, and so like in Russia, China, arguably, you'd probably not want to say anything about Winnie the Pooh if you're in China. You guys know about that. Thailand, you can't make fun of the king. It is illegal, and you can get arrested or fined, right? Yeah, so there's this ongoing thing where like people are comparing Xi Jinping with Winnie the Pooh, right? And I think South Park had an episode on this where like, because Winnie the Pooh is like a Disney property, I think, and it's like Mickey Mouse like Stan, I think, like strangles Winnie the Pooh to death or something like that in China. So they've been banning references to Winnie the Pooh. So that's censorship, right? That's censorship. And when corporations do it, though, it's not censorship, right? Unless the government is like asking them to do it, right? And sometimes the government does ask them to do it. In Germany, Germany has very strict laws on speech, right? And so they demand that companies censor things according to the government's rules. You cannot say anything against the Constitution of Germany. You cannot say anything indecent, offensive, or blasphemous, which is a bit interesting. And companies are required to censor it. And in that case, it is still censorship because they're doing so at the behest of the government. And in America, that would be illegal, right? The government can't demand that companies regulate their speech, right? But even though it's legal in America, companies still regulate speech on their platforms, and that is a hot topic right now, right? Like I said, like Elon just bought a giant chunk of Twitter because of corporate censorship. Facebook, Reddit, Twitter, Pinterest. Pinterest actually just announced yesterday that they are going to start censoring the photos on Pinterest. If you spread misinformation, and I didn't see in the press release what defines what misinformation is, maybe we can find that out, because Pinterest, censorship, misinformation. Let's see if we can find, no. Go away. Banned content that misrepresents scientific data to erode trust in climate science and experts. They have a climate misinformation policy. Yeah, but I don't... It's more than just that. Yeah, so any hate speech or misinformation or disinformation. No, that's actually... Okay, let's see if we can find the source. They don't have a source for this. Fantastic. Okay. Pinterest's history of banning content sees as harmful. It's not approaching climate change. Yeah, but it's more than just climate change. That's what I'm trying to see. See if I could click on that, that'd be nice. Let's see. Pinterest policies on misinformation. Let's see if we can actually get at... Okay. Let's see if we can actually get at the actual policy. Newsroom. I just want their policy, dude. Election integrity. Here. Community guidelines, content safety, adult content, exploitation, hateful activities, misinformation, harassment and criticism, private information, self-injury and harmful behavior, graphic threats and violence, violent actors, dangerous goods and activities, harmful or deceptive products and practices, impersonation, comments, messages. Comments are probably more of the same. Yeah. Intellectual property, site security and access, spam. Okay, so let's see if we can get into misinformation, because that's the thing that interests me. Because like somebody threatening to murder somebody, like, okay, sure, like I don't think most people have an issue with them deleting that. But misinformation is interesting because there's always the question of, who gets to define what is misinformation, right? And Facebook has a team of fact checkers, right? And the question is like, who gets to pick who the fact checkers are, and how do you know the fact checkers are right when they name something misinformation, right? Imagine arguing about climate change on Pinterest of all places, right? Yeah, like Pinterest for me is just the site that I go to by accident when I click on an image on Google Images, right? Like I'm looking up something on Google, and I'm going to go to Google Images over here, and I'm going to search for, I don't know, flower pot or something. And like Pinterest images, I'm not seeing any of them here, but they just come up all the damn time. And you click on it, it's like, you have to log in to see it. It's like, no, I don't want to. Just don't show me anything from Pinterest, please. It's the most annoying. It's the most annoying website because like it floods the Google Images hits with Pinterest things, and it makes you log in to actually view the thing that you click on. It's so stupid. Okay. Anyway, rant over. Is it? Maybe. Okay, so let's look at misinformation. Pinterest is not a place for misinformation, disinformation, malinformation, or the individuals or groups spreading it or creating it. We remove or limit distribution. So that's kind of what I was getting at earlier. Like, so they don't always just delete things, right? Like if you post, like a couple years ago when Hunter Biden's laptop made the news, right? Which had all sorts of like horribly incriminating things about Hunter Biden, Joe Biden's son, on his laptop. He left it at a repair place and abandoned it. And so the guy kept it, opened it up, realized it was full of all this incriminating information. And the New York Post ran a story about it. Facebook decided that the Hunter Biden story was misinformation or possibly misinformation. A lot of pundits were saying this looks like Russian misinformation to us. And so Facebook didn't delete like if you shared the story, it wouldn't delete it, but at the same time it would limit distribution, which means that when you have your news feed, the news feed that you see is not a chronological order of everything your friends are doing. It used to be that way. And then what they have instead is the algorithm with a capital A, and the algorithm chooses the things that it thinks that you would be interested in. But for things that are labeled as misinformation, they just typically don't show up, or they show up in much reduced numbers. And so Facebook was actively involved in suppressing the story on Hunter Biden's laptop. And about a week ago, it turned out the stories were all true. And so this is a big problem, right? Because you have private companies like Facebook deciding what is information and what is misinformation. And this directly affected the presidential campaign of the world's most powerful country, America, right? And, the New York Post, I think, had its Twitter account suspended over it until they deleted the offending tweet, which was just the news story on Hunter Biden's laptop. And they refused to delete it. And so Twitter, actively, turned off the Twitter account for a news, and it's not like the New York Post is like the New York Times. It's the New York Post. It's not... it's not nearly as prestigious a media organization as the New York Times, right? But it is a major, it's not like the Inquirer. It's somewhere in between, right? And Twitter turned off a media's, ability to share news because they had labeled this as misinformation incorrectly. It's a big deal. It's a big deal. So, so Facebook limited the distribution. Twitter just just shut off the entire media outlets' Twitter feed over it. It's a big deal, and they're wrong, right? And so how do you know that something is misinformation? That's a tough question, right? That's a really tough question. So let's see what Pinterest does. Okay. We remove or limit distribution of false or misleading content. Ooh, that's a... Man, I hope they don't have any advertising on there, because all advertising is kind of misleading, right? You know, if you drink our beer, you're going to become stronger and more physically fit. And if you buy our expensive sports car, people will like you. You know, all of that's misleading, right? That may harm pinners. Do they really call them pinners? That is the stupidest thing. It's as dumb as tweeters or whatever. What are people that use Twitter called? Tweeters? I don't know. Dumb name. Or the public's well-being, safety, or trust. That can harm your trust. I mean, come on, right? Most news stories are going to harm your trust in something, right? Like, I don't trust Russia anymore after seeing the Ukrainian invasion, right? That's so dumb. Like, this is such a stupid policy. It can harm the public's well-being, safety, or trust. Okay, yeah. So what? You can't run the story on Watergate, you know? Watergate undermined our trust in Nixon, you know? You can't run that, you know? Come on. This is such a stupid policy. All right, medically unsupported health claims that risk public health and safety, including the promotion of false cures, anti-vax advice, or misinformation about public health or safety emergencies. Okay. If you know something's a false cure, okay. Anti-vax, okay. Misinformation, yeah, again, like, this is the category of misinformation. So give me an example of misinformation. Misinformation. That doesn't help. Like, we're trying to define misinformation here, right? And they're saying, yeah, here's an example of misinformation. Misinformation. Okay, that's circular reasoning or something. I don't know. Okay, about public health or safety emergencies. I mean, okay, you know. Like, I get what they're saying there, but it's just very... That's poor. That's just poor form on their part. When you define something, you cannot use the word you're defining to define it. It doesn't work that way. Okay, false or misleading content about individuals or protected groups that promote fear, hate, or prejudice. Yeah, I have an issue with that. So, yeah, again, misleading is one of those things where, like, you know, almost anything can be considered misleading because it's very hard to tell a full story, right? Like, you can misrepresent, like, anytime you have anything that's a tweet, right, or Pinterest, however big, you know, your average pinner does, you can't tell the whole story, right? Like, try summarizing the Balkan conflict in 140 characters. Good luck, right? No matter what you write, it will be misleading. You know what I mean? About individuals or protected groups. So, okay. Individuals, all right, so you're spreading lies about an individual. Okay. Protected groups is... That's something that irks me, right? Because that means there are groups that you can spread fear, hate, and prejudice towards, right? Right? It should just be individuals or groups. You should not be able to, like, if you think that spreading fear, hate, and prejudice is a bad thing, it should be towards everyone, right? Like, what they're saying here is, like, it's okay to spread fear, hate, and prejudice against certain groups, which I have absolutely giant philosophical issues with, right? So, you know, they're just saying, we're going to pick certain groups that you can spread fear, hate, and prejudice against. Have fun. It's open field day, which I think is absolutely abominable from a philosophical perspective. They did provide an example of misinformation. It's the entire first section. This part up here. False or misleading content that harms their public well-being, safety, or trust. Yeah, but that definition there includes this, right? So it kind of, the first bullet point, medically unsupported health claims risk public health and safety. So that, you want to substitute that in for misinformation there? Okay. Medically unsupported health claims. Okay. All right, I'll accept that. False or misleading content that encourages turning individuals, groups of people, places, or organizations into targets of harassment or physical violence. False or misleading content that encourages turning individuals, groups of people, places, or organizations into targets of harassment or physical violence. You turn people into a target. Okay. So if it's true content, let's work out the logic on this. So if it's a true like if it's not false or misleading, then it's okay to turn individuals into targets of harassment or violence, right? Like, as long as you're making a true statement, hey, you should punch that person because he's got a red hat on. It's not false or misleading, right? False or misleading content, that. Right. So any true content, you should punch that person because of the color of their skin. Yeah, that's terribly worded also. Like basically it should just say, I mean, maybe there's something, yeah, probably the other section handles that. Physical violence is probably on here somewhere else. Promote dangerous goods, graphic violence and threats. Content that shows violence, disturbing scenes, threats, or language that glorifies violence. Yeah, you could probably say that part covers it, and so this is just specifically on misinformation. So spreading false information that will encourage violence. But honestly, I don't think, if you're worried about harassment and physical violence, it should just be everything that encourages harassment and physical violence. You know what I mean? I was making a joke about their information about misinformation. It's misinformation in and of itself, unless you're seeing getting it wrong. Yeah, I got you. That's funny. Conspiracy theories, including about climate change or civic participation. So that's probably in regards to the election last year, right? Or 2 years ago, I guess, at this point now. So, okay. Conspiracy theories. But that's technically all conspiracy theories, right? So no conspiracy theories can be posted on Pinterest. Okay. Again, how do you determine if something's a conspiracy theory or not? You know, like one of the things that I've always wanted to do in this class that I've never actually done is to get people to post conspiracy theories or urban legends or what have you. Just like we'll make a giant list of them and then just like turn the students loose on it and be like, is it true or false? Did this thing actually happen or not? You know, I've always kind of wanted to do that. I don't know if that sounds interesting to you all, but just basically, get conspiracy theories and urban legends and all that stuff from everywhere and actually dish it out to the class and dig into it. Like, is there any, is there any evidence for it? Is it wrong? I think that could be a fun exercise. Yeah. So yeah, technically any conspiracy theory is banned on Pinterest, but again, you have to determine what a conspiracy theory is, right? Like, is the lab leak theory a conspiracy theory from COVID? It's one of those things, right? Like, somebody has to make that call, right? Content that originates from disinformation campaigns, including about climate change, it's the same thing. Okay, so disinformation campaigns is when, like Russia's most famously doing this, they go onto social media and they spread lies, essentially, right? And the COVID vaccine will cause you to grow a second head, whatever. And so if they can identify a disinformation campaign, they can delete it. I don't know. I don't have any issue with that. Like, if you have the ability to like trace the IP address of somebody and you find that it comes from some troll farm, I don't know. I don't know anybody that would particularly have any issue with that. Of course, if you share something and that thing you shared came from a disinformation campaign, they would delete it, and you'd probably, I don't know. Maybe you'd get upset. The policies seem kind of vague. It's difficult to encompass different types of misinformation. Yeah, I think so too. And like just any conspiracy theory at all, right? Was JFK killed by Lee Harvey Oswald or some, conspiracy theory? Delete your post. I don't know. Like, I think that to a certain extent, there's value in people like being able to talk about, was JFK. And I'm not a conspiracy theorist by any means. I don't think there was a conspiracy to kill JFK. I haven't fully looked into it, but I don't think there's any good evidence to think there is, other than, why would Lee Harvey Oswald kill the president? Bush and 9/11 is a popular one. Yeah, exactly. And it's like, I don't know. To a certain extent, like, people should be able to talk about things. Factual information that's published or deliberately modified. Published or deliberately modified. Or deliberately. How do you guys parse this sentence? How do you read this? Factual information that's published or deliberately modified to erode trust or inflict harm, such as changing or omitting the context, date, or time. How do you read that? Specifically, it's the published or part that. Because it's an or, right? Like if it just said factual information that's been deliberately modified to erode trust or inflict harm, it would make sense to me, right? But this doesn't say factual information that's been deliberately modified. It says factual information that's been published or deliberately modified to erode trust or inflict harm. And if lots of factual information is published, and lots of factual information that is published erodes trust. For example, Nixon, Watergate, that erodes trust in the U.S. government. It's been published in the New York Times, I think. And what, are you going to censor that? Can't talk about Watergate. Like, I don't know. Roswell conspiracy theory wasn't reported there was an alien ship. The government corrected it. Not sure. Changing other words. Yeah, if it just said, factual information that's been deliberately modified, that's one thing. But this says published or deliberately modified, which is odd. Like, I honestly don't know what to make of this part right here. Okay, fabricated or meaningfully manipulated visual or audio content. So that almost seems like duplicate. You know what I mean? Like, changing or omitting context, date, or time is meaningfully manipulated, right? So that erodes trust or causes harm. So if you, if you Photoshop something to make it look like, somebody did something they didn't, or a caption that makes it look like they said something they didn't. Okay, yeah, sure. But I don't know if I like that right there. Okay. Civic participation, misinformation, false or misleading content that impedes an election. Yeah, see, okay, so civic participation is probably referring to the theories that surrounded the 2020 election. False or misleading content that impedes an election's integrity or an individual group's civic participation, including registering to vote, voting, and being counted in a census. So, hey, remember to vote tomorrow, but the election was today, something like that. False or misleading information about the dates, times, yeah, for voting or census participation, so don't give the wrong days for those things. Misleading on how to fill out a ballot or a census form. Misleading information about who can vote. Misleading statements about who's collecting information. Misleading information about public safety that is intended to deter people from voting or participating in a census, like you could get arrested or something. I don't know. Content that encourages or instructs voters or participants to misrepresent themselves or illegally vote. Content apparently intended to delegitimize. Yeah, this is these things up here are all fairly, I think, innocuous kinds of things. Content apparently intended. Yeah, that's a wild that's a wild set of policies right there. Apparently intended. So it doesn't even have to be intended to. It just has to look like it. To delegitimize election results on the basis of false or misleading claims. Yeah. So that's targeting Trump's claims that he actually won 2020 when he didn't. That's designed to kind of shut down that whole set of things. But it's so vaguely worded, you know, like, yeah, like even at like, you know, no election runs perfectly, right? And so there are, you know, probably some factual things you can say. You know, I don't know, like vote harvesting or things like that, where you hand your votes to other people, and you could probably post something about that. Well, you can't talk about that because that might apparently intend to delegitimize the election result. Delete, right? That's, yeah. Notice how the other things, false or misleading, false or misleading, false or misleading. This one, we will censor true statements. So, interesting use of language for these policies. Yeah, I think so. That's why I'm going through it. I haven't read these before. I'm doing it for the first time with you all. It's very interesting. So, threats against voting locations, sure. Okay, climate misinformation. Okay. So that is called corporate censorship. And so we just went through Pinterest's policies on corporate censorship, where they will take down stuff not at behest of the government, but just because of their own corporate policies. And it is a white-hot issue right now because, you know, like Elon said, you know, the national discourse takes place online these days, right? On, like, where do you argue with other people? Where do you talk to other people? Twitter, Facebook, Reddit, you know, that kind of stuff. And if these corporations are censoring the narrative, then they're controlling the public square of America. And you know, it's an interesting question of like what should be done, right? Because it impacts politics, right? Like you know, I don't think Biden would have lost if they hadn't censored the New York Post story, but it probably had some impact on the election, you know. So even though they're private corporations, there are cases in which, you know, the Supreme Court has actually upheld that even private entities can't impede the exercise of free speech in a public square. Right? So like the most famous example is called common carriers. So the phone company is a common carrier. Do you guys remember phone companies? There used to be this company called Pacific Bell, you know, and that was that came from the old Bell, which was broken up as a monopoly, and then eventually reintegrated into a company called Verizon. And Bell could not turn off your phone because of the words that you used. Right? Think about it. How weird would that be if, like, you're using your cell phone and you say, hey, I think that ballot harvesting should not be legal. And then Verizon says, well, that apparently intends to delegitimize the election, and so we're going to turn off your phone. Right? People, like, you know what I mean? Like, people would be upset about that. People would be super upset about that. Because the phone system is supposed to be a common carrier. They're supposed to allow everybody to use it. Anybody can talk to anybody, and the phone system does not censor you because it's a common carrier. You can say whatever you like on it. And social media platforms are not common carriers. They are, however, protected by something called Section 230 of the Communication Decency Act. And what that means is that they're not liable for anything that individuals say on their platforms. That said, they can still censor. And so the big issue is, are they a public square? And if they are a public square, then they can't censor things just based on their content, right? And that's a big issue because it's one of probably 3 or 4 big issues I think we need to resolve as a country. One of them we talked about before is like how cancel culture should work and how justice should work with a Twitter mob, right? Like, how do you pay your dues? How do you determine an adequate punishment when it's just people yelling on Twitter? That's one. Corporate censorship's a big one, right? Like, what are we going to do? Because politics nowadays takes place a lot online and on private platforms, where Facebook is apparently free to censor anything they want and control the narrative. You know, imagine if everybody who agreed with you was censored off of Facebook, Reddit, Twitter, Google search results aren't found, all that kind of stuff. You'd be furious. You'd be absolutely furious if they were engaging in viewpoint discrimination, right, against your views. And we're not talking about like hate speech or any of this stuff. Just like, oh, you're whatever political party you are. Nope, we're not allowing that here. If they did that, like, I think you'd be up in arms. I'm not sure it's an issue we can resolve. I don't know. It's a tough one. I just point out problems. I don't have solutions to it. And so yeah, but there is precedent. Like there have been times when like there were corporate towns where the corporations own the entire town, and so they wanted to prohibit people from like unionizing on the sidewalks because it's our sidewalk, right? You're on our land. You can't do it. And the Supreme Court actually said, no, you can't do that. It's a public square. You can't regulate free speech in public square. So there is precedent, for this kind of stuff. I don't know if it'll happen, but so far, like these companies are sort of. I kind of almost feel bad for them. If you look at like Jack Dorsey getting called in front of Congress trying to explain his censorship, like he feels stuck in this thing where like he doesn't want Russian disinformation to be spread, but at the same time wants free speech and all this kind of stuff. And I don't envy their policies at all, but like Elon literally just bought 9% of Twitter for this reason, because he doesn't feel that Twitter is upholding its commitment to free speech. So yeah, and so like the notion that like Pinterest will allow hate speech towards some groups they allow you to do hate speech for is like concerning to me. You know what I mean? Like it's a bit disturbing. You can say lies and harass and threaten people of groups. They don't specify which groups, but certain groups will allow you to harass. Like what? Really? Okay. I don't think Elon's one to be leading the charge on this. He's doing it for the attention. He might be. Yeah, he might very well be. But he uses Twitter a lot, and so I think it's just something that's been bugging him. Like, he got in trouble for tweeting several times, right? And so I think he feels if he just buys Twitter, then they can't censor him anymore. When you're worth 150 billion, what's 9 billion here and there, or whatever it was he spent, 6 billion, something like that. Okay. So, search engine results. If you look at the favorability towards different political parties based on the hit, this is the first result on Google, second result, third result, fourth result. People have done studies on this and show that the Democrat result is up ranked for the first one. And this is a study that I read, so I'm like, all right, let's do the study ourselves. And because I look at all sorts of things and I'm like, I don't know if I believe them. And so I actually did this. I recreated this experiment with my students in CSI 1, and see if I have the results in here. I don't. And so we were comparing like the results of Google and DuckDuckGo and things like that, and I don't think we found any difference between the different search engines. And I don't think the results were as dramatic as what was in this study here. But who knows? Like, there's a lot. Like, I just had students Googling controversial topics like abortion and politics and things like that, and then they were scoring whether or not they were. They went through the first 10 and scored them based on their favorability towards Republicans and Democrats. And so when we did the experiment, it didn't look like this. I think there might have still been a bit of bias towards Democrats though. But the big question was, is the first hit, because that's the one people look at, right? Is the first hit in particular more biased? And I don't think it showed that. Yeah, so fact checking is the big thing these days, right? Google and Facebook add fact checks. Like if you make a comment on Facebook, it'll tag and say, yeah, this isn't right, or something like that. If Google thinks you are untrustworthy, it will downrank your site so you don't show up on the top 10, which is all anybody looks at mostly. Facebook used to have these things called trending news, and they kind of went back and forth on it. And basically, they claimed there was just an algorithm that was picking up trending news. They denied that any humans were involved in choosing the trending news, and then it turned out that the news were curated by a team, and the team was biased, and then so they fired the team after it made news everywhere. Like, look, Facebook is choosing what is trending, right? Instead of just like observing what is trending, they were choosing what is trending. And so Facebook now, arguably, is very hesitant to do anything against, like a lot of papers have come out recently that say that Facebook has a Republican bias, which I think a lot of Republicans would be flabbergasted by. But like if you see all these interviews and things like that, like all the flack that Facebook got for this kind of like bad behavior that they got caught doing has made them very nervous about rolling out things that will disproportionately impact Republicans. And so a lot of these studies come out that say they just allow Republicans to get away with things that otherwise they would censor because they're afraid of the pushback from, like Trump when he was in office and things like that. And, when Facebook and Twitter are getting called in front of Congress constantly, to explain their censorship, like it's a big deal, and so they censored a lot less according to these papers than they should have according to their community standards because they're afraid of the pushback they would get for being politically biased, right? So Google and Facebook's copying Reddit's upvote and downvote system. Yeah. So, yeah, and the upvote and downvote system on Reddit is inherently flawed, right? Like it just means that if you have a community that believes something, they will upvote things that agree with their hive mind, and they will downvote things that disagree with the hive mind. And it creates an echo chamber. It creates a place where you will only hear opinions that agree with you, and you will not hear dissenting opinions. And that's really bad for critical thinkers, because critical thinkers want to be exposed to dissenting opinions. They want to be hearing opposing views. You need to hear one view and an opposing view, and maybe a third opposing view and a fourth opposing view. And then you can look at them and see where they agree, where they disagree. Where they disagree, you dig into the primary sources and find out which one of them is true, telling the truth, which one is BSing. Maybe it's just a matter of opinion or differences in ethical systems, and you understand that. And then you have a more balanced and nuanced and sophisticated view of the issue, rather than just having everybody repeat the same ideas back and forth to each other. And if there's a lie in there, if the lie agrees with the hive mind, then everyone will just repeat the lie, and they won't get called on it, because if you say, hey, that's actually a lie, then they downvote you because you disagree with the hive mind, and the dissent does not appear. Reddit's algorithm is bad for critical thinking. It's great if you want to have an echo chamber. It's really bad because the whole point of it was like to upvote interesting things and to downvote spam. Like that's where the system came from, but that's not how it's used. The system is used just as a agree button. Like I agree with that, I disagree with that. And so you can sort by controversial. A lot of times that's on anything that is politics related or religion related and things like that. Oftentimes sorting by controversial gives you better comments than sorting by top, because sorting by top gives you the hive mind view, not the nuanced view. Unpopular opinions, yeah. Unpopular opinions will, like the moderators will ban you if you actually have no unpopular opinion. It's actually kind of a joke, I would say, at this point, because, does anyone else not like onions? Everyone upvotes it. Yeah, I don't like onions either. What an unpopular opinion. Yes, upvote. It's so stupid. Yeah, the moderation system on Reddit is also kind of garbage. Kind of very much garbage. I say that as a Reddit moderator of a community of, I don't know how many people are in it. How many people are in the subreddit I moderate? $125,000 people. So, yeah. So speaking as a Reddit moderator, yeah, it's garbage. The moderation system is garbage. So, and it's gotten worse. Right now, a very common thing that people do is if you post in a subreddit that like unpopular opinion doesn't like, they will ban you from unpopular opinion, even if you haven't posted there, right? Just because you post in, some other, and Makes Me Smile, the moderators on Makes Me Smile will ban you simply because you've contributed to a subreddit whose political leanings they don't like. We talk about our place. See you, Melissa. Yeah, I mean, yeah, not today. Not today. But our place was pretty cool. Anyway, so, yeah. So basically, the topic is that of viewpoint diversity or ideological diversity. You know, having tolerance for people who disagree with you, and that's something I talked about before. One of my friends on Facebook put it as, you have to be aware of the fact that your people can get it wrong sometimes. Like, it's possible your team has made a mistake, right? You have to be open to that possibility, and it's getting bad, honestly, online. Like, you know, it's so bad that it's not even like you have to break the rules. They'll just ban you because you have bad think, you have wrong think, you know. And Reddit's tolerating it, right? The Reddit .com, the admins are apparently perfectly fine with moderators just banning people, not for breaking the rules, but just for posting in, you know, political subreddits that are against their own political beliefs. It is terrible. So, as long as the government doesn't pass a law telling you to censor things, it's somehow not illegal. Amazon was pressured by Joe Lieberman, who was a vice presidential candidate, to cut off payments to WikiLeaks. Visa did as well, and so it wasn't official, so it's not censorship. But somehow, you know, when you have a vice presidential candidate and senator coming to you saying, "Yo, don't give money to these guys. We don't like them," somehow they all fell in line and cut off payment to WikiLeaks. A judge also ordered DNS service cut off, which is interesting. I'm not sure how that's legal, because it's like basically censoring the internet. You know, you can still get there if you have the IP address, but you can't go to WikiLeaks.com, you know, when it was censored. And it's like, do you have to be convinced of a crime, you know, convicted of a crime in order to have, no, you just, you know, order it to be shut off, which is somehow not censorship, right? Like, can you imagine a judge saying, I want you to turn off DNS service to the New York Times, right? So if you go to NewYorkTimes.com, it doesn't work. Like, to me, that's censorship. Well, the website's still up. You can reach it by the IP address if you can find that somehow. Oh yeah, well, how do I find the IP address? Use the DNS service, right? So that's somehow not censorship, and that's something I think we also need to talk about in our society. Like, should judges be able to turn off websites without them being convicted of a crime? Because I'm dubious of that. To me, that seems like censorship. Yeah, and so Julian Assange, you know, so I'm sure you're aware, he hid in the Ecuadorian embassy in London for years, and then finally got arrested, and is still in prison today. So, what was the other big issue I was going to talk about? Yeah, monopolies, right? So is Apple a monopoly? I said there's like 4 big topics we need to talk about as a society. I think that's like another big issue. Like, the notion that, like, you can't put software onto an iOS device unless you go through Apple's gatekeeping, right? And you have to give them 30% of your money, right? That's where the whole Epic Game Store lawsuit between Apple and Epic was about. If you guys are following that, Fortnite got banned on you know, iOS devices. You can't play Fortnite anymore on an iPhone, right? So yeah, those are the big topics, I think, in our society today that we need to talk about, and not about, I don't know, Caitlyn Jenner or whatever. Nobody cares. All right, that's it. Have a great spring break. Take the midterm. It opens up in 1 minute. I would just take it now, honestly, if you're prepared for it. Just don't put it off, you know, like Nico. Don't wait till 10 minutes before the midterm closes, Nico. Wait 9 minutes. And yeah, just get it done. You have no homework. I'm not going to give you any homework over spring break. Just enjoy yourself. Enjoy life. Take it easy. It's been a tiring semester, I think, in a lot of ways. So just nothing to do. Just get the midterm done. Just enjoy the rest. All right. Thanks a lot, y'all. And I will see you on Monday after spring break. Peace out.